Welcome to Nature Calls, everybody. It's good to see everyone. First thing, I want to let you know that we are recording this Zoom call. Second, we are muting your microphone and ask that if you want to comment, that you type your comment or question in the chat at the bottom of your screen. This will make it easier for our presenter to manage the questions and answers at the end of the presentation. We've received some great comments about this program that we're calling Nature Calls. It's our attempt to get you out of the house virtually and into our conservation work around the state. This program is approximately 15 minutes long, with another 15 minutes for questions and answers. We have been featuring a new conservation program every week on Thursdays at 3. We are going to go on a brief hiatus after today, and we will resume on Thursday, August 13th for a monthly program on every second Thursday of the month. I'm pleased to introduce Geoff Sorrell, the restoration ecologist for TNC, Alabama, to take us on a tour of his work around the state. Take it away, Geoff.
Speak briefly about why we burn in Alabama and why we invest resources in that, why we feel like it's a really important management tool, where we do that, and how we do it. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and roll through a little review of, for some of us, hopefully, why. And to my mind, it really is all about sunlight. Fire opens the forest canopy, opens the mid-story, and allows sunlight to get to the ground. And that's really where most of our plant diversity in the southeast, and for that matter, in most fire-dependent systems lies, is in the lower strata, if you will, of the forest. So plants are the primary producers in any system, and we have a ton of diversity in plants from the coastal plain to the mountains in this state. And basically, it's these organisms on the ground level that really make things tick. With plant diversity, you have insect diversity, and there's been a lot of emphasis on pollinator diversity and pollinator protection and management lately. Not only people think about introduced non-native bees, but there are a whole host of native bees, wasps, beetles, flies, butterflies, moths, etc., that people don't often think about. And each one of those is tied to an individual plant or a group of plants, etc. And so with insect diversity, that leads oftentimes to vertebrate diversity. In this case, a vertebrate, the gopher tortoise, that eats plants, but of course without the pollinators there would be no plants to eat. Another fire-dependent organism in the southern part of our state. And so really, it all does come back to fire. And that is why, in a very short synopsis, why we really feel like fire is an important thing for us to invest in. And as I've alluded, we see that fire is an important tool from the coast. This is a coastal marsh in the panhandle of Florida, all the way up into the mountains, essentially. This is Weogufka Creek in Coosa County in central Alabama, very hilly terrain. And basically, fire plays the same role regardless of whether you're on Black Creek in northern Florida or on this creek in central to northern Alabama. There are some nuances and differences in how we apply it, but overall, the results are the same. So how do we get what we get done? So in the Alabama chapter, we have 6 people in our staff of approximately 20 that have a fire responsibility, and I've listed them here. None of these folks listed only do fire. All of us do other things, generally other stewardship, and in Keith's case, a whole bunch of other things. He's also our deputy state director. But fire is a large part of what we do. I would say of the 6 people listed, I have the most year-round involvement in fire, but everyone else plays a very significant role on that list. In addition to those 6 folks, we hire 2 seasonal folks every year. One of those seasonal folks works with the U.S. Forest Service primarily, and then one of them leads a crew, a seasonal crew. I'll get into that in a minute. And then we also have other fire-trained staff in the office. I'm very happy to say that our chapter director, Mitch Reed, is fire trained, and he comes out and burns with us. that's an exceptionally rare thing in the Nature Conservancy, to have the person at the top getting out in the field and having a really solid understanding of what it takes to do the work we do. And then we have a new forest staff member who will also be fire trained. So hopefully by the time things really get moving in the busy season next year, we'll have 2 additional folks that we can call on occasionally. So for us, we have a lot of small properties that we try to manage with fire, but we really focus on properties in Autauga and Baldwin, Bibb, Coosa, Mobile, and Escambia counties. And if you group those by region, Baldwin, Mobile, and Escambia are coastal counties, and we use fire a little differently than we would in the central Alabama counties, such as Coosa, Bibb, and then Autauga. But these counties are where we focus most of our effort when we are conducting Nature Conservancy-led fire operations. So in the past 20 years that TNC's been doing fire, the annual production has increased to an average of approximately 3,000 acres. This year we've had an exceptionally good year despite a number of hurdles, and we have broken the 5,000 acre mark. Now that we're managing more acres in more places, I think that 5,000 acre number is what we're going to have to shoot for as closer to our norm, and year in and year out. So another important aspect of our fire program is taking on seasonal staff, and those folks come to us through, excuse the acronym, they're the Student Conservation Association and associated program, the Gulf Corps. And last year we doubled our capacity by having 4 seasonal fire crews as opposed to 2. And so that was approximately 15 people that came to us with little to no experience. And we basically took them from folks that maybe have never seen a single prescribed burn to, by the time they left us, 15 to 20 burns, if not more, which would potentially represent 10,000 acres of fire. And so in addition to the restoration work, this is something that I'm really passionate about, is training the next generation of fire practitioners, because everybody's got to start somewhere. And if we don't literally pass the torch, there will be no one to do this work. So it's critically important that we do this. So is it difficult occasionally? Is it frustrating occasionally? Yes, but it's worth it, because I've been training seasonal crews for 10 years now. And when I think about all the folks that I've trained and the folks that really took to fire, and the fact that they worked for all the federal agencies spread across the United States, it's pretty rewarding to think back and look and still work with some of those people. So we invest a lot in these young folks, and we give them a lot of classroom training to start off with, and then we get them out in the field. And on day 3, we usually have a drip torch in their hand, and they're putting fire on the ground, live fire. And so we really do a full immersion, and within their second week, they're burning with partners and really experiencing what it looks like on the ground. And they don't have a lot of time to soak up an awful lot of information, but that's why our staff continues to shepherd them, if you will, through this process, make sure that they are learning, making sure that they're staying safe, and making sure that the work is getting done. So they get all the basic courses that they need for basic fire, and those courses are the same that all the federal firefighters get across the country. So when these folks leave us, they have basic fire, and they always have chainsaw training as well. So we set them up with some really good basics that, one, allows them to be very, very useful on our crews, but also makes them very marketable in the broader job market when they leave us. So speaking of partners, the partner that we work with the most in terms of acres in the state of Alabama is the U.S. Forest Service. And some of you may be familiar with the forests in Alabama. We're really set up nicely in Alabama, and that we have forests from literally the top to the bottom of the state. And so we have a nice representation of habitat types that are protected on U.S. Forest Service property. And I'll list them real quick from the south. The Conecuh National Forest is about 80,000 acres, and our coastal crew embeds with them very frequently. We burn a lot with the Conecuh, and you've got a really nice representation of coastal biodiversity in that forest. Moving north towards Auburn, you've got the Tuskegee National Forest, which is one of the smallest national forests in the whole system. It's sort of a fall line sandhill forest, a very important representation of that habitat, of which there's not very much left. And then you've got the Talladega moving from the west, the Oak-Mulgee, and then moving northeast, the Shoal Creek and Talladega district. So that's a large forest that's split into 3 districts. And then you've got the Bankhead National Forest. And so you've got longleaf on all these forests. Bankhead there's not much longleaf on Bankhead, but there's a little bit. There's also shortleaf. So all of these forests are fire dependent. And here's a shot of the Conecuh, typical fuels, and typical fire behavior from last fall. A really, really exceptional place to burn. And working with the Forest Service it really gives us a great opportunity as a smaller nonprofit to burn at scale. And by that I mean, for example, we burn typically 30,000+ acres a year with the Forest Service. So we get to see what it looks like to burn 2,000 acres in a given day. And that really gives you a vision for how to think big in terms of fire. They also give us access to training, which is something that is difficult for our staff to get, especially when it comes to wildfire training, which is really a prerequisite for advancement in our fire credentials. So really important that we work with them. And then here's a shot of the Tuskegee and Bartram Trail. If you know anything about William Bartram's travels, he traveled through that region, and there is a trail that supposedly approximates his route of travel through the Tuskegee. So another important partner for us is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And for those of you who know the history of TNC in Alabama and land acquisition, we have worked very closely with the Fish and Wildlife Service to acquire land along the Cahaba River. And this particular shot was taken last April on the Cahaba Refuge. And the Fish and Wildlife Service has little to no dedicated fire staff in the state of Alabama. And so anytime they burn, they lean very heavily on different refuge staff that have some fire training. But in this case, in particular, they lean very heavily on the Nature Conservancy. Keith and company were burning this property before it became a refuge, and we continued to be really instrumental in getting the fire done. We do everything from build the fire breaks to conduct and implement the fires with the leadership of Fish and Wildlife Service. So basically, they bring staff in from Florida. They show up on burn day or the day before, and everything's ready to go. And so typical year for us working with them, we might burn 1,500 acres with them. And basically, we do everything, including the implementation there. They just bring a burn boss, and we make things happen. So it's a really good partnership. Another incredibly significant refuge that we burn on with Fish and Wildlife Service is up in Anniston on what used to be Fort McClellan, the Mountain Longleaf National Wildlife Refuge. And it was 2 years ago, we burned the second highest point in Alabama on this refuge. It's covered in longleaf and chestnut oak. And once again, without our assistance, their fire efforts would really suffer. So we're able to add quite a bit to their operations and help get a lot more acres treated with good ecological fire in that partnership. And a third federal partnership in Alabama is our work with the National Park Service. The National Park Service does not own very much property in Alabama. Most people think about the Park Service, they think about things up in the Smokies or something out west, but there are some smaller parcels in Alabama. This picture was taken looking across the Tallapoosa River at Horseshoe Bend National Military Park. another really nice sort of pre-montane longleaf site that for decades was fire suppressed. And TNC has been involved very early on with efforts to get fire back on this property. Another significant property that we occasionally help on is up in the northeast part of the state, which is where I am today, actually, on Little River Canyon. And there's some extremely rare pitcher plants and other stuff up there that require fire. So we work with the Park Service up there. And just like with Fish and Wildlife, the Park Service has no fire staff in this state. And so anytime they burn, they might bring in staff from occasionally 5 to 6 different states to try to get a single burn done. So it's a huge logistical load for them to carry. And so anytime we can just show up, and we might have to drive a couple hours, but it's not like coming from South Carolina with staff, with engines, and make out a large contingent on any given burn, it really makes things happen. So another good partnership that we'd like to grow and maintain. A partnership that is developing, I'll say, is one with the state of Alabama. And Keith, in particular, knows what a long road that's been. The state of Alabama owns tens of thousands of acres, and those acres are managed for various things. Most often people think about state parks, and they think about wildlife management areas. And we work with all 3 sub-agencies of DCNR, Department of Conservation National Resources. So Wildlife, Freshwater Fisheries, State Lands, who is basically responsible for forever wildland, and then of course state parks, to try to aid them with capacity, to try to broaden their vision of where fire should be used, how fire should be used, and just help get more done. And we're not at the beginning of that relationship, but we are at the beginning of the implementation of 15 years of work by Keith and folks that came before me to try to get the paperwork set up so that then the work on the ground can start. And we are trying to work through a similar process with the Alabama Forestry Commission. And so once the paper is signed, then it's really all about trying to build consensus. And so here we are looking at maps, and these are maps that were developed by Georgia Pearson, who is our GIS specialist. And having a really beautiful map to sit down and look at helps people really envision what, in this case, I might be talking about, what the ideas that I'm presenting. And in this picture, we've got all the state agencies that I just mentioned, and include some other partners, and as well as TNC staff, talking about how to get fire in Coosa County around Flag Mountain. And this is critical. Get everybody on the same page. Everybody understands where the other partners are coming from. Make a good plan, and then once all that's in place, you got to get out in the woods and you got to implement the plan. And here's an instance in Autauga County, working with a young land manager that works for the state at Autauga WMA, and we're helping him conduct a night burn, which something he'd never really thought about, a tool he'd never used, and allowed us to get even more done with that WMA this year. So there's a prime example. And I'll come back to the Forestry Commission. So in Alabama, common to most southern states, the forestry commissions have the responsibility of fire protection. So most often that means a big yellow piece of equipment moving dirt around to put out fire. And that is an important role. It's a critical role, and we assist them with that as well. But we're also trying to work with them to look at ways to get more progressive fire management done on some of these unusual and rare, and in my mind, really precious sites like Flag Mountain that I mentioned in Coosa County. And so we hope down the road that we can have the paperwork in place that allows us to work as partner agencies in a really seamless fashion across the state. And I'll touch on another really important partner for us, especially in the lower coastal plain, and that's the Longleaf Alliance. Many of you some of you may even be members of the Longleaf Alliance, and you may not know exactly what they do. The Longleaf Alliance doesn't own land, but they do an awful lot in terms of making sure that land is managed appropriately. And one of the things that they do that is really important to TNC is they provide us with with partner capacity. So anytime we're burning in Baldwin County, Escambia County, and hopefully in Mobile County, if we have a need, they generally drop whatever they're doing and come and bring us 3, 4. This summer it's been 6, 8 people, engines. So it's been really, really helpful to have them, so that if I'm burning down at Splinter Hill Bog, I don't have to call the other 4 or 5 of those 6 people that I listed previously to drive from Birmingham down to Baldwin County. I can call Bob Wilkin here, who's sort of a wildfire and prescribed fire legend, and ask him who's available, and he generally provides people. So they're a nonprofit like ourselves, have a slightly different mission, but play an incredibly important role in us implementing fire the way it should be done on our southern properties. So we're getting towards the end, and we'll close with this slide of Bibb County glades. This is the glade we call Goat Glades. So we're looking downhill towards the Little Cahaba River, and this track is a really nice example of what people with a vision and people that are willing to put the hard work in, the product of all that effort over 20 years. This particular piece has been burned for about 20 years, starting with a couple of paid staff and a bunch of volunteers, and now growing to the fire organization that we have. And so we use places like this that we manage as sort of models and reference points on how it should be done, what things should look like, and quite honestly give us inspiration and motivation for moving good fire into all the other places that we have yet to really play a hand in management with. So at this point, I'm happy to open the floor for questions if there are any.
Yeah, Geoff, we do have a few questions. Let's see. Let's start up at the, actually, we're going to start at the bottom and work our way up, I guess. So what situation necessitates a nighttime burn?
That's a good question. Nighttime burning is a tool that is underutilized, and let me just answer the question, then I'll ramble a bit. Typically, I like to use nighttime fire under conditions wherein maybe daytime fire might be a little risky. So we're looking for more moderate conditions. So maybe things have gotten a little dry. Maybe our daytime forecast is a little windy, and so we've got a fuel bed, typically good grasses or good pine litter that will carry a fire during night. We've got a little bit of a breeze, and so we use fire to conduct a burn that maybe we would have missed. Maybe we would have missed it that entire season if we hadn't have looked at burning at night as an additional tool. I will add, though, that night burning has fallen out of favor in a lot of places because of smoke management. Anyone who's had a campfire at night on a calm night, or you've looked at the smoke coming out of your chimney on a cold winter night, knows that smoke settles. And so daytime smoke management is a huge issue. Nighttime smoke management is also a huge issue. And so you can't night burn in all places. If, like Splinter Hill Bog on the southern end of that property, we can't night burn there because I-65 is adjacent to the property. So that is not a possibility. But if you're on a remote site and you've looked at your smoke and what it's going to do over that evening and into the next morning, and everything lines up, then it can be an excellent tool. I really, really do enjoy burning at night. It's beautiful aesthetically, but it's also very effective if you pick the right place and time.
Thanks, Geoff. So we're almost out of time, so I'm going to cherry pick a few of the questions. And if you're a staff person and you've asked a question and we don't get to it, I know you'll have another opportunity to see Geoff and talk to him. Are your crews trained to fight natural forest fires?
So everyone that does fire with us has the basic training that's given to all the folks that are on hand crews across the West right now that are working on, last I checked, there's 5,000 people on wildfires right now in the Western states. And the basic training they have is the same stuff that all of our folks get. And so they are technically qualified. We don't get to engage in fires too often, wildfires that often, but this year was an exception. Our crews or one of our crews plus other staff have been on 3 wildfires just this year alone around on and around Splinter Hill Bog. So it's something that we do, but not very much of, but the qualifications are the same.
Geoff, I'm going to follow up that question, one from Olivia. And what's the age of our fire crew interns? What's the average age?
Typically, they range from high school graduates to folks that are recently out of college. So I would say 18 to mid-20s typically.
And then a question from John Steiner, and we'll close out with this one. What's the mixture in the drip tank for burning?
Well, it's typically heavy on the diesel and light on the gas. So depends on who you talk to and what you're burning and what time of year. 2/3 diesel to 1/3 gas. I like to go a little stickier is what I call it. So 3/4 diesel to 1/4. And for years I've used biodiesel, which works really nice. So you've got a very pleasant French fry aroma that you don't have to smell diesel all day. And it works really well too. And you always have to tweak that mixture too, but something like that.
Good. Well, that's great information, Geoff. It's cool to know about the smelling French fries out in the forest. So I really appreciate that, Geoff. Those were some stunning photos that you gave us, and we appreciate the background and your trouble to even get here today because you're working out in the field.
Not at all.
You're doing real work, and you had to make a special effort. So thanks for that. You know, we've had a fun time sharing our conservation work around the state of Alabama during this series. I said earlier, this is our last Nature Calls program for the summer. We'll pick back up on Thursday, August 13th, and then we will begin monthly programs on the second Thursday of each month. Everyone on this Zoom today will receive an invitation to our next program on August 13th. Feel free to share the invitation by forwarding the email you receive or send us their email address. As you see, conservation never stops. The important work of conservation goes on to benefit people and nature, no matter what is happening in the world. So we need your support now more than ever, and I'm talking about your financial support. If you can, please make a gift today at support.nature.org/Alabama. And if you have a donor advised fund, please consider making a gift from that fund. We're also able to accept gifts of appreciated assets and would love an opportunity to speak with you about those gifts. Thanks for joining, everybody. Have a great summer.
Geoff?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope that went well. Hope that everybody's content with that.
Very well. Thank you so much.